The alarms screamed across Deck 7 at 4:47 a.m., metal shrieking against metal as the cutting torch slipped and ignited pooled hydraulic fluid. Ilara Quinn felt the explosion before she heard it, a pressure wave that threw her sideways into a steel bulkhead, her clipboard clattering across the grated floor. Her vision doubled. The taste of copper flooded her mouth. She tried to stand. Her legs wouldn't answer. Through the smoke, she could see the cutting crew scattering, their silhouettes disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness beyond the floodlights. No one turned back. The fire spread along the deck plating, following the fuel line toward the starboard manifold. She knew what came next. Everyone who worked shipbreaking knew. Her hand found the radio clipped to her belt. She pressed the transmit button. Nothing. Dead battery. She'd meant to charge it overnight. The heat intensified. She dragged herself backward, her palms slick against the corroded metal. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. Something inside her chest felt wrong, displaced, grinding. Footsteps approached from somewhere beyond the smoke. Heavy boots. Deliberate. "Help," she tried to say, but the word came out as a rasp. The footsteps stopped. A figure stood at the edge of the light, unmoving, not fleeing, not rushing forward, just watching. Ilara's vision narrowed. The edges of the world turned gray, then black. Her last thought was a question she couldn't voice. Why would someone just stand there? Want to know if Ilara survives? And what she discovered that made someone want her dead? Subscribe now to know where the real mystery begins. When the secondary explosion ripped through the manifold, the shockwave threw debris across 3 decks. The fire suppression system, offline for maintenance, per the schedule, never activated. By the time the offshore emergency response team arrived, the flames had consumed most of Deck 7's port side. They found Ilara Quinn 40 minutes later, half buried under a collapsed catwalk. No pulse, no respiration. Core temperature already dropping. The medic reached for his radio. Fatality confirmed. Female, mid-30s. Maritime safety ID on the vest reads Quinn E. He didn't see her fingers twitch. Most people would have moved on by then, closed the report, tagged the body. But the younger medic, new to offshore work, still unsure of his instincts, knelt down anyway and placed 2 fingers against her throat, just below the jawline. He held his breath. There. Faint. Irregular. But there. "Wait," he said. "Wait." By the time they loaded Ilara onto the medical helicopter, her body had been without adequate oxygen for 17 minutes. The flight medic intubated her mid-air, hands steady despite the turbulence. Her abdomen was distended, rigid. Blunt force trauma, likely internal bleeding. Possible spinal compromise. The helicopter banked hard toward the mainland. Below, the shipbreaking facility's lights glittered against the black water, a small industrial constellation that would be dark forever in 72 hours. At the mainland trauma center, the attending physician made the call in under 3 minutes. "Prep for emergency surgery. Notify the family." But the family had already been notified, not by the hospital, by someone else. In the surgical suite, as the anesthesiologist adjusted the ventilator settings, the ultrasound technician moved the wand across Ilara's abdomen. She paused, adjusted the angle, enhanced the image. "Doctor," she said quietly. The surgeon glanced at the monitor. His expression shifted. "There are 2, the technician said. The surgeon's jaw tightened. He looked at the clock, looked at Ilara's vitals, looked at the 2 faint, flickering heartbeats on the screen. In the waiting room, 3 people sat in silence. 2 of them were smiling. Some moments only reveal their weight in hindsight, but this one carried its gravity forward, immediate and absolute. 6 hours earlier, Ilara had stood on the observation deck with her inspection logbook open, the wind pulling at her hair. The facility stretched out before her like a dying creature, massive ships in various states of dismemberment. their hulls cut open to reveal rust-streaked ribs and empty compartments. She'd been assigned here for the final audit, the one that would either clear the company for closure or trigger a federal investigation. She'd found the discrepancies on her second day. Small things at first. Manifests that didn't match the photographic logs. Weight calculations that defied physics. Hazardous material reports that listed quantities in neat, identical increments. Too neat, too identical. Then she'd found the sealed compartments. Someone had welded shut 3 cargo holds on the SS Aldridge, a decommissioned container ship scheduled for scrapping. The manifest claimed the holds were empty. The weight distribution suggested otherwise. Ilara had documented everything in the logbook, a physical bound record with numbered pages and a tamper-evident seal. She carried it with her everywhere, not in her office, not in her quarters, with her. What's hidden in those sealed compartments? And why would a company risk everything to keep Ilara from finding out? Subscribe to continue watching. The conspiracy runs deeper than you think. That morning, before the shift began, she'd received a call from the site manager. Routine check-in, he'd said. Just wanted to confirm her timeline. When would the final report be ready? 72 hours, she'd told him, per the contract. And you found everything in order? The question sat wrong. Too casual, too expectant. I'll submit my findings on schedule, she'd said. After the call, she'd walked down to Deck 7. The cutting crew was already at work, their torches throwing blue-white sparks into the darkness. She'd wanted to inspect the Aldridge's holds before the weekend, document the welds, photograph the seams. She'd noticed the man in the dark jacket standing near the equipment shed. He wasn't part of the crew. He'd been watching her, phone to his ear. When their eyes met, he'd turned away, but not before she saw his expression. Not hostile, but evaluating. Ilara had made a choice then. She'd clipped the logbook inside her vest, the bound edge pressed against her ribs, and headed toward the Aldridge. Not everyone notices when a pattern breaks, when the rhythm of a place shifts just slightly out of true, but some people feel it like a change in air pressure, undeniable and specific. She'd climbed the gangway alone. The ship's interior was a maze of stripped corridors and empty rooms, lit only by the work lights strung along the bulkheads. She found the first sealed hold on the lower deck. The welds were recent, smooth, professional, expensive, not the hasty patchwork of a decommissioning crew. She photographed the door, measured the frame, noted the serial number stenciled on the hatch. Then she heard the footsteps behind her. "Ms. Quinn?" She turned. The site manager stood in the corridor, hands in his pockets. 2 men flanked him, security contractors, from their posture and the radios on their belts. "You're not supposed to be in this section," the manager said. His tone was pleasant, too pleasant. "I'm authorized for all areas pending certification," Ilara said. "Of course, but for your safety, we'd prefer you coordinate with security before entering decommissioned vessels." "I'll note that in my report." The manager smiled. "We'd hate for anything to happen to you out here. It's dangerous work. Accidents happen." The 2 men shifted slightly, a synchronized movement that narrowed the corridor. Ilara kept her voice steady. "I'll be more careful." She walked past them, the logbook a solid weight against her chest. She didn't look back. By the time she returned to her quarters, she'd made a decision that would cost her everything. The call came at 7:16 a.m., 3 hours after Ilara's body was loaded onto the helicopter. Her husband, Marcus, answered on the second ring. He'd been awake, hadn't slept since Ilara left for the offshore rotation 4 days ago. "Mr. Quinn?" The voice was smooth, practiced. "This is Stephen Halloran, General Counsel for Court and Maritime Solutions. I'm calling about your wife." Marcus's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "There's been an incident at the facility. Ilara was injured. She's being transported to St. Jerome Medical Center." A pause. "Mr. Quinn, I need to be direct with you. The prognosis is not favorable." "What does that mean?" The medical team is doing everything possible, but you should prepare yourself. Given the severity of her injuries and the complications, another pause, heavier this time. You should come immediately, and you should bring family. Marcus's hands shook as he ended the call. He dialed his mother first, then Ilara's parents, then his sister. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Stephen Halloran had made another call 60 seconds earlier, to the company's executive vice president. Quinn's husband is on his way, Halloran had said. I framed it as expected. Terminal prognosis. Family notification, the standard protocol. And the logbook? The VP asked. Still unaccounted for. If it wasn't destroyed in the fire, it's either on her person or in her quarters. Security is handling the quarters now. She was pregnant. Yes. That complicates things. Actually, Halloran said, it simplifies them. Emotional state, medical incapacity, the stress of the environment, all reasonable grounds to question her judgment. If she makes any claims, we position her as unstable. If she doesn't survive, the audit defaults to our internal review. And if the logbook surfaces, then we make sure the person who finds it understands the situation. The corporate conspiracy is just beginning to unfold. Want to see how far they'll go to protect their secrets? Subscribe now. This story gets darker before it gets better. At St. Jerome Medical Center, the surgical team worked in controlled urgency. Ilara's injuries were catastrophic. Ruptured spleen, fractured ribs, severe internal bleeding. But the twins were alive. Barely. 23 weeks gestation. Viable, but only if Ilara survived the next 6 hours. The lead surgeon, Dr. Lena Frank, stood at the scrub sink, arms crossed. She'd reviewed the intake report twice. The timeline didn't fit. 17 minutes without oxygen should have caused irreversible brain damage. But Ilara's pupils were reactive. Her EEG showed organized activity. Has anyone contacted obstetrics? Dr. Frank asked. They're standing by, the surgical nurse said. And the family? In the waiting room. Dr. Frank dried her hands. She didn't like coincidences. She especially didn't like coincidences that arrived with corporate lawyers. When Marcus Quinn entered the surgical wing, he was flanked by his mother and sister. Behind them, moving with the ease of people accustomed to hospital bureaucracy, were 2 of Ilara's colleagues from the Maritime Safety Division. Except they weren't colleagues, they were compliance officers. Cordovan Maritime Solutions had sent them to manage the narrative. Stephen Halloran met them in the consultation room. He wore a dark suit and an expression of professional sympathy. Mr. Quinn, I can't tell you how sorry we are. Ilara is one of our most valued auditors. This is a tragedy. Marcus's voice was raw. Can I see her? The surgical team is still working. It may be some time. Halloran leaned forward slightly. I want you to know that Cordovan is taking full responsibility. We'll cover all medical expenses, and we're prepared to discuss a settlement to support you and... He paused. Your family, whatever the outcome. Marcus's mother, Lorraine, narrowed her eyes. Settlement? We want to make sure Marcus is taken care of. That's our priority. Your priority is liability, Lorraine said. Halloran's expression didn't change. We're here to help. In the surgical suite, Dr. Frank made the first incision. The damage was extensive, but methodical. She'd seen blast injuries before. This wasn't random. The trauma pattern suggested Ilara had been positioned in a specific way when the explosion occurred, shielded on one side, exposed on the other, almost as if she'd been bracing for impact. Vitals? Dr. Frank asked. BP stabilizing. Heart rate 120. The twins are holding. Dr. Frank worked in silence for another 20 minutes, repairing what could be repaired, stabilizing what couldn't. When she finally stepped back, her scrubs were soaked with blood. She's going to survive, Dr. Frank said. The team exhaled. But she's not out of danger. Post-op recovery will determine neurological function, and the twins. She looked at the fetal monitor. They're fragile. Any additional stress could trigger early labor. In the waiting room, Stephen Halloran's phone buzzed. He read the message. His jaw tightened. He turned to Marcus. The surgery was successful. Ilara is stable. Marcus's knees buckled. His sister caught him. Halloran continued, his tone carefully neutral. However, the medical team has indicated that her cognitive function may be impaired. There may be memory loss, confusion. It's too early to tell. But she's alive, Marcus said. Yes, she's alive. What Halloran didn't say, what the message on his phone had confirmed, was that the logbook hadn't been found in Ilara's quarters, which meant it was either destroyed or still with her. And if it was still with her, someone needed to retrieve it before she woke up. There are moments when power reveals itself not through action, but through the careful construction of silence, and this was one of them. Director Cooper Jackson arrived at the hospital at 11:33 a.m., unannounced and unescorted. He wore a gray suit that looked like it had been slept in, and he carried a battered leather briefcase that had seen decades of use. He didn't stop at the reception desk. He didn't ask for directions. He walked directly to the surgical wing as if he'd been there 100 times before. The nurse at the station looked up. "Sir, visiting hours." Jackson placed a badge on the counter. "Federal Maritime Commission." The nurse's expression shifted. "I'm here about Ilara Quinn," Jackson said. "Are you family?" "No." "Then I can't." "I'm the oversight director for the Cordovan facility audit. Ms. Quinn reports to me. I need to confirm her condition." The nurse hesitated, then picked up the phone. "Let me get the attending." Jackson waited. He didn't sit. He stood with his hands behind his back, studying the board that listed patient statuses. Ilara's name was there, marked as post-op, stable, ICU. Dr. Frank appeared from the scrub corridor, still in surgical attire. She studied Jackson with the same clinical precision she brought to the operating room. "You're with the Maritime Commission?" "Cooper Jackson. I oversee facility decommissioning audits. Ilara Quinn was conducting the final assessment for the Cordovan site." "And you drove 3 hours to check on her condition?" "I drove 3 hours to understand what happened." Dr. Frank folded her arms. "What happened is that she was caught in an industrial explosion and nearly died. She's stable now, but her recovery is uncertain." "Can she speak?" "She's sedated." "When she wakes, I'd like to be notified." "Why?" Jackson met her gaze. "Because if there was negligence at that facility, I need to know before the site closes in 68 hours. Dr. Frank's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or respect. "I'll make a note." Jackson turned to leave, then paused. "Doctor, has anyone else asked to see her? Anyone from the company?" "Not yet. They will. When they do, make sure someone is with her, someone you trust." "Why?" "Because auditors who find problems have a tendency to become inconvenient." He walked away before she could respond. A federal director, a missing logbook, a company willing to do anything to protect its secrets. Subscribe now to see how this conspiracy unfolds and whether Ilara will survive long enough to expose it. In the ICU, Ilara lay motionless, her body connected to machines that breathed for her, monitored her, kept her suspended in the space between life and death. Her abdomen was swollen, the twins still clinging to existence inside her. The medical team had done everything they could. Now it was a matter of time. But something was wrong with the timeline. The ICU nurse, a sharp-eyed woman named Violet, who'd worked trauma for 18 years, noticed it first. Ilara's vitals were too stable. Her oxygen saturation was too high. For someone who'd been without air for 17 minutes, her brain activity was too organized. Violet pulled the chart, reviewed the intake notes. Something didn't add up. She found Dr. Frank in the break room. "Doctor, I think you should look at Quinn's EEG again." Dr. Frank frowned. "Why?" "Because it doesn't match the injury profile. She should be showing signs of hypoxic damage. She's not." They returned to the ICU. Dr. Frank studied the monitor. Violet was right. The brainwave patterns were consistent with sedation, not oxygen deprivation. "Maybe the medic got the timeline wrong," Violet suggested. "Or maybe she wasn't unconscious as long as they thought. Then why didn't she respond?" Dr. Frank didn't answer. She was thinking about the blast pattern, the way Alara's injuries suggested she'd been braced for impact. She was thinking about the federal director who'd arrived within hours, unannounced and asking questions. She was thinking about the logbook mentioned in Alara's personnel file. A physical record, tamper-evident, always on her person. "Violet," Dr. Frank said quietly. "When they brought her in, what happened to her personal effects?" "Bagged and logged. Standard protocol." "I want to see them." They walked to the storage room. Violet retrieved the bag, a large plastic sack marked with Alara's name and patient number. Inside, a shredded vest, steel-toed boots, a broken radio, a safety helmet with a cracked visor. No logbook. Dr. Frank spread the items on the exam table. She checked the vest pockets. Empty. She examined the boots. Nothing. Then she noticed the vest's inner lining. It had been cut, not torn by the explosion, but sliced cleanly, as if with a knife. "Someone opened this," Dr. Frank said. "When?" "Before it got here." They looked at each other. Violet spoke first. "You think someone took something?" "I think someone tried to." Dr. Frank returned to the ICU. She stood at Alara's bedside, watching the monitors, watching the steady rise and fall of the ventilator. She thought about the twins, about the impossibility of their survival, about the way Alara's body had held on when every medical probability said it shouldn't. She thought about the man in the gray suit who'd warned her to keep someone she trusted nearby. There are truths that announce themselves, and there are truths that wait, patient and silent, for the right moment to be seen. Dr. Frank made a decision. She called security and requested a guard outside Alara's room. Then she called the hospital administrator and requested a lock on Alara's medical records. No access without her direct authorization. Then she called Cooper Jackson. He answered on the first ring. "Someone searched her belongings," Dr. Frank said, "before she arrived here. Looking for the logbook. You knew." "I suspected. Alara called me 2 days ago. She said she'd found irregularities. She said she was documenting everything." "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that cost companies millions. The kind that end careers." Jackson paused. "The kind that make people expendable." Dr. Frank's grip tightened on the phone. "If she wakes up." "When she wakes up," Jackson corrected. "Keep her safe, doctor. I'll handle the rest." He ended the call. In the waiting room, Marcus sat with his head in his hands. His mother and sister had gone to get coffee. He was alone with Stephen Halloran and the 2 compliance officers. Halloran leaned forward. "Marcus, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand something. Alara was under a lot of stress. The audit was difficult. She was pregnant, isolated, working long hours. It's possible—" He paused. "It's possible her judgment was compromised." Marcus looked up. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if she makes any claims about the facility, about negligence or wrongdoing, you need to consider the context, the trauma, the pregnancy, the medication. Memory can be unreliable." Marcus's voice was cold. "You're saying she's lying." "I'm saying she's been through hell, and sometimes, when people go through hell, their perception of events becomes distorted." Marcus stood. "Get out." "Marcus, get the fuck out." Halloran rose slowly. "We're here to help. When you're ready to talk, we'll be available." He left. The compliance officers followed. Marcus sat back down. He didn't notice the man in the gray suit sitting 3 rows back, watching everything with the stillness of someone who knew how to wait. Some people reveal their importance through position, through title, through force. Others reveal it through the way the world reacts when they're present, a subtle shift, a held breath, a question left unasked. Ilara woke at 2:47 a.m. on the 3rd day. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to feel the tube in her throat. The pull of the IV lines, the crushing weight of her own body. She tried to move. Pain exploded through her chest and abdomen, white-hot and absolute. The monitors screamed. Violet was at her side in seconds. "It's okay. You're okay. Don't fight the ventilator. Just breathe." Ilara's eyes darted wildly. Where was she? What happened? The fire. She remembered the fire, the explosion, the figure watching from the shadows, the logbook. She tried to reach for her chest, for the vest pocket where she'd clipped it. Her arms wouldn't respond. Restraints. Soft but firm. "You're in the hospital," Violet said, her voice steady and calm. "You were in an accident. You're safe now." Ilara's gaze fixed on Violet. She tried to speak, but the tube made it impossible. Violet saw the panic rising. "I'm going to get the doctor. Don't move." "Please." Ilara's awake, but the logbook is missing, and the people who tried to kill her are still out there. Subscribe to find out what happens when she realizes the evidence is gone. Dr. Frank arrived within minutes. She examined Ilara's pupils, checked the monitors, assessed her responsiveness. Then she leaned close, her voice low. "Ilara, I know you can hear me. If you understand, blink twice." Ilara blinked twice. "You were injured in an explosion at the facility. You've been unconscious for 3 days. You're stable, but you're not out of danger. Your babies are stable too. Do you understand?" Ilara blinked twice. Then her eyes widened. She tried to lift her hands again, more urgently. Dr. Frank glanced at Violet. "Remove the restraints." "Doctor." "She's not disoriented. She's trying to tell us something." Violet released the straps. Ilara's right hand moved immediately to her chest, fingers searching, desperate. Nothing. She pressed harder, feeling for the familiar edge of the logbook. Gone. Her heart rate spiked. The monitors shrieked again. "Ilara, stop! You're going to hurt yourself." Dr. Frank caught her wrist. "What are you looking for?" Ilara's eyes locked on hers. She couldn't speak, but her expression was pure desperation. Dr. Frank understood. "The logbook. You're looking for the logbook." Ilara blinked twice, hard. "It wasn't with you when they brought you in. Someone cut open your vest. I think they were looking for it too." Ilara's breathing quickened. The ventilator struggled to keep pace. "But they didn't find it," Dr. Frank said quietly. "Which means you hid it somewhere else." Ilara's gaze didn't waver. "Where?" Ilara couldn't answer, couldn't write, couldn't gesture clearly enough to make herself understood. Frustration and fear warred across her face. Dr. Frank made a decision. "We're going to extubate you. It's risky, but if you can breathe on your own, you can talk. Do you want to try?" Ilara blinked twice. 20 minutes later, the tube was out. Ilara gasped, coughed, her throat raw and bleeding. Violet held a cup of water to her lips. She took a careful sip. "Slowly," Dr. Frank said. "Your voice is going to be rough." Ilara swallowed, tried to speak. The words came out as a croak. "The ship." "What ship?" "Aldridge. Lower deck. Behind the panel." Dr. Frank leaned closer. "You hid the logbook on the ship?" "Sealed it. In the bulkhead." Ilara's breathing was labored. "They're going to scrap it. 60 hours." Dr. Frank's stomach dropped. If the logbook was on the ship, and the ship was scheduled for demolition in 60 hours, the evidence would be destroyed, permanently. Who knows about this? No one. I didn't trust anyone. We need to tell someone. The oversight director. No. Elara's voice sharpened. They'll get there first. They'll destroy it. Then what do we do? Elara's eyes burned with an intensity that made Dr. Frank's breath catch. You have to get it before they do. I'm a surgeon, not an investigator. Then find someone who is. Dr. Frank stood. She looked at Violet. Stay with her. No one comes in without my authorization. No one. She stepped into the hallway and called Cooper Jackson. He answered immediately. Is she awake? Yes, and we have a problem, Dr. Frank explained. Jackson listened without interruption. When she finished, there was a long silence. I'll handle it, Jackson said. How? There's a salvage team standing by. They can access the ship within 12 hours, but I need Elara to give me the exact location. She's not stable enough to leave the ICU. Then bring me to her. You're not family. I can't. Doctor, in 58 hours that facility will be demolished. Everything on it will be gone. If Elara's evidence is destroyed, the people responsible for her injuries will walk away clean. Is that what you want? Dr. Frank closed her eyes. I'll get you in. 30 minutes later, Cooper Jackson stood at Elara's bedside. He looked older than he had in the hallway. Tired, worn, but sharp-eyed and present. Ms. Quinn, he said. I need you to tell me exactly where you hid the logbook. Elara's voice was barely a whisper. Who are you? Cooper Jackson, Federal Maritime Commission. I'm the oversight director for your audit. How do I know? You're not with them. Jackson reached into his briefcase and pulled out a file. He opened it on the bed. Inside were photographs, ships, manifests, financial records, all marked with Elara's audit codes. I've been tracking Cordovan for 2 years, Jackson said. You're the first auditor who found what I've been looking for, but I need the logbook. Without it, I have nothing. Elara studied him. Then she spoke, her words slow and deliberate. Lower deck, Section C. Panel marked. Maintenance access. 4th bolt from the left. Hollow cavity. I sealed it with epoxy. Jackson wrote everything down. Can you draw it? Elara nodded. Violet brought a notepad. Elara's hand shook, but she sketched the layout, the corridor, the panel, the exact location. When she finished, she looked at Jackson. They tried to kill me, she said. I know. Why? Because you found out what they've been hiding, and because you were about to cost them everything. What were they hiding? Jackson's expression darkened. Illegal waste disposal. Toxic materials dumped in sealed holds instead of processed through proper channels. They've been doing it for years, saving millions. But if it's exposed, they'll face federal charges, prison time, the end of the company. Elara's breath caught. There are people on those ships. Workers. Not anymore. They evacuated everyone 2 days ago, except the cleanup crew. They're still there, finishing the demolition prep. Then we have to. I'm already moving, but you need to stay here. Stay safe. Let me handle this. Elara's eyes burned. If they find out, I talked to you. They won't. Not until it's too late. Jackson left. Dr. Frank watched him go, then turned back to Elara. You did the right thing, she said. Elara's voice was hollow. Did I? Because it feels like I just signed my own death warrant. You're alive. Your babies are alive. That's what matters. For now. Dr. Frank didn't argue, because Elara was right. As long as the logbook remained hidden, she was a target, and time was running out. There are moments when understanding arrives not as revelation, but as the slow, sickening certainty that the path forward offers no safe choices, only the least terrible among them. The salvage team arrived at the facility at 4:18 a.m., moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this work 100 times. They wore hazmat suits and carried industrial extraction tools. They didn't announce themselves. They simply appeared, authorized by federal order, and began their work. The night security supervisor, a man named Darnell, who'd been with Cordovan for 6 years, met them at the gate. He checked their credentials, then called the site manager. "We've got a federal salvage team here. Maritime Commission authorization. They're saying they need access to the Aldridge." "Deny them," the manager said. "Sir, they've got a court order." "I don't care. The site is closed. No access without corporate approval." "They're not asking." The manager's voice went cold. "Then stop them." Darnell looked at the salvage team. 4 people, all of them armed with legal authority and federal backing. He looked at his own team, 2 guards, both minimum wage, both with families. "I'm not doing that," Darnell said. "You want to stop them? You come down here and do it yourself." He hung up. Then he opened the gate. The race to recover the evidence has begun, but will they reach it before Cordovan destroys it forever? Like now to see if justice prevails or if powerful corporations always win. The salvage team moved directly to the Aldridge. The ship loomed in the darkness, half dismantled, its hull scarred with cutting marks and blast damage. They boarded quickly, following the map Jackson had provided. Lower deck, Section C, Maintenance Access Panel. They found it in 8 minutes. The panel was exactly where Alara had said it would be. The 4th bolt from the left turned smoothly, recently loosened. They removed the panel. Inside the hollow cavity, wrapped in industrial plastic and sealed with epoxy, was the logbook. The team leader lifted it carefully, handling it like the explosive device it was. She photographed the cavity, the panel, the seal. Then she secured the logbook in an evidence bag and called Jackson. "We have it," she said. "Intact? Every page. Get it off the site, now." The team evacuated. By the time the site manager arrived, sirens blaring and security scrambling, they were gone. At the hospital, Ilara woke to find Dr. Frank standing at her bedside, phone in hand. "They have it," Dr. Frank said. Ilara's entire body sagged. "It's real? They found it?" "Every page. Intact." For the first time in 3 days, Ilara cried. Not from pain, but from relief so overwhelming it felt like drowning. Dr. Frank sat on the edge of the bed. "You did it." "I didn't do anything. I just held on." "That's more than most people could have managed." Alara looked at the monitors, at the steady rhythm of her twins' heartbeats. "What happens now?" "Now you heal. The rest is someone else's fight." But Alara knew better. She'd seen the way Stephen Halloran had looked at her in the consultation room, not with sympathy, but with calculation. She'd seen the way the site manager's voice had changed when she'd asked too many questions. She knew that possession of the logbook was only the first step. The real fight was just beginning. At 6:47 a.m., Cooper Jackson walked into the regional office of the Federal Maritime Commission and placed the logbook on the director's desk. "We have them," he said. The director opened the logbook, flipped through the pages. His expression darkened with every turn. "This is criminal," he said quietly. "Yes." "How many ships?" 12. Over 3 years. Millions of gallons of toxic waste dumped illegally. Falsified records, bribed inspectors, and one auditor nearly killed to cover it up. The director closed the logbook. "Do we have enough for charges?" "With this, we have enough to bury them." "Then do it." Jackson allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Already in motion. At 9 o'clock a.m., federal agents arrived at Cordovan Maritime Solutions headquarters. They came with warrants, evidence seizure orders, and instructions to secure all records related to the decommissioning operations. Executives were escorted from the building. Files were loaded into trucks. Hard drives were confiscated. Stephen Halloran watched from his office window as his career disintegrated in real time. He reached for his phone, then stopped. There was no one left to call. At the hospital, Marcus sat with Alara for the first time since she'd woken. He held her hand, careful not to disturb the IV lines, and tried to find words that didn't exist. "I thought I lost you," he said finally. "You almost did." "Why didn't you tell me about what you found?" "Because I didn't want you to be implicated. If something happened to me, I needed you to be clean." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I would have protected you." "You couldn't have. No one could have. Except me." She paused. "And I barely managed." They sat in silence. The twins' heartbeats pulsed on the monitor, steady and strong. "They're fighters," Marcus said, "like their mother." Alara looked at him. "I'm not a fighter. I'm just someone who couldn't walk away." "That's the same thing." Maybe it was. Maybe the difference between surviving and surrendering was nothing more than the refusal to accept the world as it was presented. The insistence that truth mattered, even when it cost everything. There are moments that rewrite the rules, that shift the balance of power not through force, but through the simple, undeniable act of refusal. And this was one of them. The indictments came down 14 days later. 8 executives, 12 compliance officers, 4 security contractors. Charges ranged from environmental fraud to attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming: manifests, photographs, financial records, and the testimony of a woman who'd refused to disappear. Stephen Halloran was arrested at his home at 6 a.m. He didn't resist. He simply asked for his lawyer and said nothing else. But the cameras were there, and the images of him in handcuffs, expensive suit, blank expression, hands behind his back, spread across every news outlet by noon. The site manager was arrested at the facility, mid-demolition. He tried to run, made it 30 feet before federal agents tackled him into the mud. The footage went viral. At the hospital, Alara watched the news coverage from her bed. Her twins had stabilized. She was off the ventilator, off the heavy sedation, but still too fragile to be moved. Dr. Frank had insisted on another week of observation, minimum. Marcus sat beside her, his hand wrapped around hers. "You did this. I documented it. Jackson did this. No, you risked everything. You could have walked away." "I couldn't. Not after I saw what they were hiding." On the screen, a reporter stood outside Cordovan's headquarters, now cordoned off with federal tape. Behind her, agents carried boxes of evidence to waiting trucks. Sources say the investigation centers on allegations of illegal toxic waste disposal spanning multiple years. The Environmental Protection Agency has launched a parallel investigation. Cleanup costs are estimated in the hundreds of millions. And at the center of it all, a single auditor who refused to be silenced. The reporter's voice faded as the camera cut to aerial footage of the ship-breaking facility. The Aldridge was gone now, scrapped and smelted, but its secrets had outlived it. Alara closed her eyes. "How many people were exposed to that waste?" "Hundreds," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe more." And no one said anything. For years. Because saying something would have cost them their jobs, their livelihoods. People have families to feed. I have a family too, and I said something anyway. Marcus didn't argue. Because she was right. And because the weight of that choice, the knowledge that speaking up had nearly killed her, was something only she could carry. At the Federal Maritime Commission, Cooper Jackson sat across from the regional director, reviewing the final audit report. It was comprehensive, damning, and meticulously detailed. Alara had documented everything: dates, locations, weights, discrepancies. The logbook wasn't just evidence. It was a roadmap. "She's good," the director said. "She's more than good. She's incorruptible, and that nearly got her killed." "Will she testify?" "If she can. The doctors are concerned about stress levels. She's still at risk for premature labor." Then we build the case without her. Use the logbook. Use the physical evidence. We don't need her to testify to win." "But she'll want to," Jackson said. "She'll insist." "Then you'll have to convince her otherwise." Jackson shook his head. "You don't know her. She didn't survive that explosion just to let someone else tell her story." The director leaned back. "Then make sure she survives long enough to tell it." At the hospital, Dr. Frank reviewed Alara's latest scans. The internal bleeding had stopped. The fractures were healing. But the twins were still premature, still fragile. Any additional stress could trigger early labor, and at 25 weeks, their chances were uncertain. She found Alara in physical therapy, walking laps around the ICU with Violet's assistance. Slow, painful, but determined. "You're supposed to be resting," Dr. Frank said. "I've been resting for 2 weeks. I need to move." "You need to heal." Alara stopped, leaned against the wall. "I can do both." Dr. Frank folded her arms. "The federal prosecutors want you to testify. Jackson thinks it's a bad idea. I agree with him." "Why?" "Because the stress could kill your babies, and you've already sacrificed enough." Ilara's expression hardened. "If I don't testify, they'll argue the logbook was falsified, that I was mentally compromised, that the evidence isn't reliable." "They can argue whatever they want. The physical evidence is overwhelming. But I'm the only one who can explain how it was gathered, why it matters, what it cost." Ilara's voice cracked. "I'm the only one who can make sure this doesn't happen again." Dr. Frank studied her. "You know you might lose them. If you testify, if the stress is too much." "I know." "And you're still willing to do it?" Alara looked down at her swollen abdomen, at the twins who'd somehow survived the unsurvivable. "They're alive because I didn't give up. I'm not going to give up now." Dr. Frank didn't respond, because there was nothing she could say that would change Alara's mind. And because, despite every medical instinct screaming otherwise, she understood. Some battles couldn't be delegated. Some truths couldn't be told secondhand. Some prices could only be paid by the people who'd earned the right to pay them. 3 weeks later, Alara Quinn appeared before a federal grand jury. She wore a maternity dress and moved carefully, flanked by Marcus and Dr. Frank. She spoke for 2 hours, walking the jury through every page of the logbook, every discrepancy, every moment of doubt and fear and determination. When she finished, the foreman asked if she had anything else to add. Alara looked at the jury. "I want you to know that I didn't do this because I'm brave. I did it because I couldn't live with the alternative, and I want you to know that there are people who still work in these facilities, who still face these choices every day. This isn't over. It's just one chapter." The grand jury returned indictments on all counts. At the hospital, Dr. Frank monitored Alara's vitals with obsessive precision. The testimony had taken its toll: elevated blood pressure, irregular contractions. But the twins were holding. "You're lucky," Dr. Frank said. "I know. I'm not sure you do. By every statistical measure, you shouldn't be here. Neither should they." Ilara placed her hand on her abdomen. "Maybe statistics don't account for stubbornness. Maybe they don't. There are consequences that arrive like thunder, immediate, undeniable, absolute. And there are consequences that spread like ripples, quiet and relentless, reshaping everything they touch." Ilara gave birth at 32 weeks. It wasn't planned. Her body simply decided it was time. The contractions started at 3 a.m., sharp and unrelenting, and by dawn, she was in the delivery room, surrounded by a team that had been on standby for 6 weeks. The twins arrived 4 minutes apart. Tiny, fragile, but breathing. A boy and a girl. Marcus cried. Ilara was too exhausted to do anything but stare at them, disbelieving. They spent 3 weeks in the NICU, wired to monitors and incubators, gaining ounces at a time. Ilara visited every day, sometimes twice, sitting in the rocking chair and reading to them. Stories about ships and storms and people who refused to sink. Marcus brought her food. Dr. Frank checked on her daily, even after she was officially discharged. Violet stopped by with care packages and unsolicited advice about breastfeeding. Cooper Jackson sent flowers and a handwritten note. "You changed everything. Thank you." But the person who surprised Alara most was Darnell, the night security supervisor from the facility. He appeared one afternoon, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable and determined. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. "I should have stopped them. I should have done something." Alara studied him. "You opened the gate for the salvage team. You let them through when your boss told you to stop them. That's not nothing." "It's not enough. It's what you could do. That's all anyone can ask." Darnell nodded. He didn't stay long, but before he left he said, "I put in my resignation. I can't work for companies like that anymore." "What will you do?" "I don't know, but I'll figure it out." After he left, Marcus asked, "Do you believe him?" "I believe he wants to believe himself. That's a start." The trial took 4 months. Alara testified twice more, each time stronger, each time more certain. The defense tried to discredit her, argued she'd been unstable, traumatized, influenced by federal agents with an agenda, but the logbook spoke for itself. And so did the physical evidence, the sealed holds, the falsified records, the financial trails that led directly to the executives who'd authorized it all. The jury convicted on every count. Stephen Halloran received 12 years. The site manager received 8. The executives received sentences ranging from 6 to 15 years. Cordovan Maritime Solutions filed for bankruptcy and dissolved. But the win felt hollow, because Alara knew the company was just one symptom of a larger disease. There were other facilities, other auditors, other people making the same impossible choices she'd made. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked one night as they sat in the nursery, watching the twins sleep. "Regret what?" "All of it. The investigation, the testimony, everything you gave up." Alara didn't answer right away. She thought about the explosion, the hospital, the weeks of pain and fear. She thought about the way her body still ached, the way her hands still trembled when she thought too hard about what could have happened. "I regret that it was necessary," she said finally, "but I don't regret doing it." "Would you do it again?" "I hope I never have to." At the Federal Maritime Commission, Cooper Jackson reviewed the new protocols that had been implemented in the wake of the Cordovan scandal. Enhanced oversight, mandatory third-party audits, whistleblower protections. It was progress. But it was also performative, reforms that would be chipped away at, undermined, forgotten as soon as the public outrage faded. He called Alara. "Have you thought about coming back? To auditing? To making sure this doesn't happen again?" Alara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I have 2 infants and a body that's still held together with surgical staples. I'm not coming back. Not now. But eventually. Maybe. Or maybe I'll find another way to make a difference." "Like what?" "I don't know yet. But I'll figure it out." Jackson believed her. Because if there was one thing he'd learned about Alara Quinn, it was that she didn't give up. She just found new ways to fight. 6 months after the trial, Alara stood on the deck of a decommissioned ferry, holding her daughter while Marcus held their son. The facility had been repurposed, turned into a maritime museum and educational center. The ships were no longer being scrapped. They were being preserved. A plaque near the entrance read, "In memory of those who spoke when silence was easier." Alara ran her fingers over the words. "Do you think it matters?" Marcus looked at her. "Do you?" "I think it has to. Otherwise, what was the point?" There was no easy answer, no guarantee that the reforms would hold, that the lessons would stick, that the next auditor in the next facility would make the same choice she'd made. But the plaque was there. The museum was there. The story was there, preserved in metal and memory, and the quiet insistence that some truths were worth the cost. And maybe that was enough. Not perfect, not permanent, but enough. There are moments that heal, and there are moments that simply teach you how to live with the scars. Both have their place, both matter, and both endure. 3 years later, Ilara Quinn stood in front of a classroom of maritime safety students, her twins playing quietly in the corner under the watchful eye of a teaching assistant. She'd been invited to speak, not about the trial, not about the scandal, but about the work itself, about what it meant to be an auditor in an industry that didn't want to be audited. The job isn't about finding violations, she told them. It's about making sure the people who cut corners understand that someone is watching, that someone cares, that the truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. A student raised her hand. But what if telling the truth puts you in danger? Ilara didn't hesitate. Then you make sure the truth outlives you. The student frowned. That's not exactly reassuring. It's not supposed to be. This work isn't safe. It isn't easy, and it isn't always rewarded. But it's necessary. And if you're not willing to do it when it costs you something, then you're just performing safety, not practicing it. The room was silent. Ilara let the weight of that statement settle before continuing. She taught the class for 2 hours, walking them through real cases, redacted examples, the mechanics of documentation, and evidence preservation. She didn't talk about the explosion. She didn't mention the hospital. She let the work speak for itself. Afterward, a young woman approached her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you still think about it? The facility? What happened?" "Every day." "Does it get easier?" Ilara looked at her twins, now building a tower of blocks on the floor. "No, but you get stronger. And that's not the same thing as easier, but it's enough." The young woman nodded. "Thank you." At home that night, Marcus made dinner while Ilara read bedtime stories. The routine was ordinary, grounding, a sharp contrast to the life she'd lived 3 years ago. But the ordinariness was hard-won, built on the wreckage of what came before. "Do you ever wish you'd made different choices?" Marcus asked, as they sat on the couch after the twins were asleep. "Every day, but I don't regret the ones I made." "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to." Marcus laughed. "Fair enough." They sat in silence, the kind of comfortable quiet that only came from years of shared history. Outside, the city hummed with life, people working, struggling, making their own impossible choices in the face of systems that demanded silence. Ilara thought about the students in her class, about the young woman who'd asked if it got easier. She thought about Darnell, about Cooper Jackson, about Dr. Frank and Violet, and all the people who'd chosen to act when inaction would have been safer. She thought about the logbook, now sealed in federal evidence storage, its pages a permanent record of what happened when someone refused to look away. At the Federal Maritime Commission, Cooper Jackson retired. He'd spent 42 years in the field, and he was tired. But before he left, he submitted a final report, a comprehensive review of auditing practices, whistleblower protections, and enforcement mechanisms. He dedicated it to Ilara Quinn. The report was adopted. New regulations were implemented. Training programs were expanded. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was better. And better was enough to save the next person who found themselves standing where Ilara had stood, staring at evidence they couldn't ignore and a choice they couldn't avoid. Somewhere, on a decommissioned ship being prepared for its final voyage, another auditor opened a sealed hold and found something that shouldn't have been there. She photographed it, documented it, secured the evidence. She didn't know Ilara's name, but she knew the protocols. She knew the protections. She knew that someone, somewhere, had fought to make sure she could do her job without dying for it. And that knowledge made all the difference. At the Maritime Museum, the plaque near the entrance was cleaned every month. Visitors stopped to read it. Some took photos. Others simply nodded and moved on. But the words remained, etched in metal, a quiet reminder that the cost of truth was high, but the cost of silence was higher. Alara visited once a year, on the anniversary of the explosion. She stood on the deck where it happened, now repurposed and safe, and she thought about all the versions of herself that could have existed if she'd made different choices. She didn't mourn those versions. She simply acknowledged them. The Alara who walked away, the Alara who kept silent, the Alara who prioritized safety over truth. None of those versions survived. Only this one, scarred, stubborn, still standing. Marcus joined her on the deck, the twins holding his hands. They were older now, starting to ask questions about why their mother walked with a slight limp, why she sometimes stared into the distance, why strangers occasionally stopped her on the street to say thank you. "What do we tell them?" Marcus asked. "The truth. When they're ready, and if they ask why you did it?" Alara looked at her children. "I'll tell them that some things matter more than safety, and that choosing to matter is the hardest choice anyone ever makes." The twins ran ahead, laughing, unaware of the weight their presence carried, the impossibility of their survival, the miracle of their existence. They were the living proof that sometimes, against all statistical probability, the stubborn refusal to surrender was enough. And maybe that was the real legacy. Not the trial, not the convictions, not the regulations, but the simple, undeniable fact that Alara Quinn had stood in the fire and refused to burn, and in doing so, had shown others that survival was possible. Not easy, not guaranteed, but possible. And for the people who came after, the auditors and whistleblowers and quiet resistors who faced their own impossible choices, that possibility was everything. Some stories end. Others simply continue, carried forward by people who refuse to let them die. If stories like Alara's move you, stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, subscribe now for more. Because the truth is worth fighting for, and some voices refuse to be silenced.